What counts as violence? Who decides that some types of violence are a problem and other types are a good thing? Do some people talk about religion and violence so that they can focus on other people's violence rather than their own? Does the phrase religious violence make sense? That's what this video is about. What counts as violence? Everything that causes physical injury to other people? But what if I'm defending myself? And does surgery count as violence? It hurts, but it helps at the same time. And what if a pedestrian is about to get run over by a truck and I push him out of the way? Is that violence? And do only physical actions count as violence? Or can the words I say be violent too? Or what about things I don't do, like seeing someone in need and doing nothing? And what about actions that don't involve other people, like killing mosquitoes or mowing the lawn or pulling a muscle in my own leg while jogging? Do those count as violence? For some of us, all of these examples might represent violence. For others of us, only some of them would. So, how do you use the word violence? When you talk about violence, what sort of things are you usually talking about? Are there things that maybe could be called violence, but you don't tend to label that way? You might like to pause the video now and think about that. As you've been thinking about it, you may have realized that when we talk about violence, we usually use the word only for things that other people are doing, not for things we're doing ourselves. And that we tend to use the word violence only for things we don't like, not for things that we think make our own lives better. That's also the case for the phrase religious violence. If you hear someone talking about religious violence, they're probably blaming someone else for the fact that there is violence in the world. Maybe they're blaming religious people, or maybe they're blaming Muslims. It's usually someone else. And people who talk about religious violence usually don't talk about all the ways that they themselves are complicit in violence as members of modern society. Do we live in a nation with an active military? Does violence occur in prisons in our country or in nursing homes? Does rape happen? Has violence ever been carried out on our behalf in the name of freedom or security, at home or abroad? Or so that we can continue to live at our current standard of living? Is the absence of violence in our daily lives the result of violence in the past or in other parts of the world? Using the phrase religious violence can distract us from asking tough questions like these by focusing our attention on other people's problems with violence. Plus, religious violence is an artificial category that doesn't actually help us understand what's going on when violence occurs. Suppose we tried to divide up all acts of violence into two boxes, religious and non-religious. How would we decide which actions to put in which box? The decision would be pretty arbitrary, partly because no one is just religious. People who participate in religious communities are also citizens of various countries, members of political parties, students, teachers, doctors, mothers, fathers, rich and poor. And there are always many different factors and circumstances that lead up to an act of violence. There's never just one reason someone does something. So it doesn't make sense to label someone's action religious violence just because that person happens to be Christian or Muslim or Jewish. Imagine a man named Andy. Andy is a Christian. He goes to church. He loves Jesus. As a child, Andy was beaten by his father. Now he's a soldier. He's under a lot of strain. One day, he hits a fellow soldier. Last week, that same soldier said that Andy had a stupid accent. Today, that soldier insulted Jesus. Andy hit him. Would we want to put Andy's act in a religious violence box? What about a box for non-religious violence? Neither of these labels captures the whole reality of the situation. Now suppose that this story I just told you was about a Muslim soldier named Ahmed, instead of a Christian soldier named Andy. Would boxes for religious and non-religious violence be helpful in that case? Does it matter if the guy is a Muslim rather than a Christian? Obviously not. Okay, now suppose that the guy in the story wasn't a soldier, but a plumber. Or what if we didn't know anything about the guy, except for his religious affiliation, because the newspaper didn't report anything else? Now should we use boxes for religious and non-religious violence? Because we don't happen to know about the other factors that led up to his violent act? That doesn't seem like a very good idea. The truth is, if we want to get the whole picture, and not a distorted picture, it's best to throw these boxes away and not to use the phrase religious violence at all. Instead, when we hear about an act of violence, let's make sure to find out all the relevant facts and be careful about what labels we put on people's actions. In this video, we heard that people tend to use words like violence and religious violence when they're talking negatively about other people's actions, not their own. We asked how we might be complicit in violence ourselves as members of modern societies. And we considered other reasons not to use the phrase religious violence, including the fact that there are always many factors leading up to a violent act. To think more about these topics, you can check out the other resources on our website.